This month, the Labor government celebrates 10 years in power in the Northern Territory. In 2001, Claire Martin led Labor to victory after 27 years in the political wilderness. A decade on, the Labor government holds power through a deal brokered with independent Jerry Wood. Genevieve Hussey looks back at the last 10 years.
Everyone in this room who believed that one day Labor would make great strides in the Territory, and today we have done that.
I think I was the most shocked person in the Territory. Being a member of the Labor Party and being a member of the Labor caucus, there was no expectation ever that you would be part of a government.
In 2001, Labor narrowly claimed victory in a Northern Territory election for the first time since self-government.
She captured the imagination of Territorians sufficiently to be able to persuade them that it was time for a change.
They were poor buggers who'd spent so long in opposition, and to their credit, they did have plans.
The first item on Labor's to-do list was getting rid of mandatory sentencing for property crime.
It was really what was left defining the difference between the CLP and the Labor Party in 2001. So actually getting rid of that piece of legislation was a pretty big moment for all of us.
Claire Martin says the new Labor government was a reformist one.
We didn't have education going to the remoter parts of the Territory. There wasn't an independent electoral commission. We didn't have privacy legislation. The Parliament didn't have an estimates committee. So a lot of those things that were taken for granted in the rest of Australia, we actually introduced here in the Territory.
I think what Labor did do, though, is they worked out how to mirror some of the best aspects of the CLP. A couple of those, for instance, are representing themselves as a business-friendly party.
Former Labor Treasurer Sid Stirling says he's proud of Labor's economic record.
Given the situation, the budgetary situation we inherited, to be able to turn around many successive deficit budgets into 5 consecutive surplus budgets was tremendous.
But critics argue Labor just didn't do enough.
It was manage the status quo. There was nothing new on the agenda. It's the same problem they're suffering now. It was all very well for Claire to ride into town on the train, but the railway was not a project of the ALP's making.
Yes, agree absolutely with Shane. That work wasn't done certainly by the Labor government. It was important to make sure that, OK, you've got the piece of infrastructure, how are you going to make it work?
Claire Martin still rates the waterfront redevelopment and bringing gas on shore as some of her proudest achievements.
Certainly the gas, there had been tilts at gas over time and, again, we continued that work.
4 years after they came to power, Labor again prepared to go to the polls.
Get off the road now, move off the road.
This time the election campaign focus was very much on law and order.
When you're talking about habitual drunks, then we've got to tackle that. We can't walk away from it.
But the Criminal Lawyers Association's John Lawrence looks back in sorrow at that time.
They have confirmed, if not converted, the Territory into basically a gulag and introduced a very large amount of criminal law reform, which is in the main draconian, punitive, and has increased the imprisonment rate.
This has been an historic win for our Labor Party.
Labor claimed electoral victory in 2005, this time with a massive majority and growing public expectations.
Those expectations grew commensurate with the numbers that we had in the Assembly. And of course, you can have too great an expectation on what is possible to deliver.
People were jostling for positions, and most importantly, that discipline had gone. And I wonder now, looking back, whether some of their purposefulness had gone as well.
Trouble came in 2006 when the high incidence of sexual abuse and domestic violence in Territory Aboriginal communities made national headlines. Claire Martin's Aboriginal government colleagues began to turn against her.
She eventually set up an inquiry. The first head of the inquiry announced he couldn't do it, so she had to get someone else. They just didn't manage it well.
Looking back, I don't think I could have changed what were the intentions of the federal government, and that makes me sad.
We regard this as akin to a national emergency.
In 2007, the federal government announced an emergency intervention and sent the police and army into Indigenous Territory communities.
When the intervention happened, I sat at my desk when John Howard finally rang me and told me what he was doing and thought I just should leave now. I mean, I just felt that was such an offence to the Territory and to Aboriginal Territorians that I just, I couldn't believe that it was going to happen. I have done my time as Chief Minister and I stand down.
Claire Martin didn't resign until the end of 2007. Her touted successor, Paul Henderson, stepped up as Chief Minister after what some regarded as a coup.
They ditched a leader who I think would have them in a better position today than where they currently stand.
Once you lose the bounce that you need and the energy that you need, and you're not seeing it as clearly as before, it's time to go.
The Labor government scraped home at the 2008 election with a one-seat majority. But the resignation of Labor MLA Alison Anderson left the party relying on independent Cherry Wood to hold power. Claire Martin is no longer a member of the Labor Party. She says she was disappointed by an attempt from the fifth floor to blame her for the 2008 election result. But she admires the way the Henderson government has forged ahead since the election.
We've had a global financial crisis. There was an election that reduced the majority. I think it's a measure of Paul Henderson and his government that they're working their way through that. Hard yards, and that's what we're seeing. So well done.
While the Australian Medical Association believes Labor has delivered improvements in the health arena in the last decade, NT President Paul Bowett says it's not 10 out of 10 on the report card.
In my particular area, that of child health, I'm really not seeing what I had hoped would happen with a concerted effort from a government in power for 10 years. I'd give them 4.
I would say that it's been probably a sad 10 years from an Aboriginal perspective.
And this is the formal order of the court now, so it's the end of the process. Well done.
The Northern Land Council says while the last 10 years haven't been happy for Indigenous Territorians, the Labor government has delivered on native title.
Congratulations. I'm very, very pleased. It's a great...
We are getting consent determinations, and that's through mutual understanding and respect to all parties. So that's been a success story.
The NT Environment Centre also welcomes Labor's work on co-management of national parks, land clearing and water management, but says Labor has struggled with some of the tough issues.
I think they've made their decision that we'll be a frontier state and we'll claim the name of the oil and gas capital of Northern Australia, and they're not going to let much stop that.
The next Northern Territory election isn't due for 12 months. But the close result at the last poll means it's likely to be a hard-fought contest.
Labor has the problem of many long-term governments, and these days 10 years is long-term. They need to come up with ideas or reasons for people to vote for them. The CLP has unfortunately been plagued by levels of disunity, and that's always a political problem. The next election will be as interesting as others, I'm sure, but I don't think we'll see another parliament so finely balanced.